Okay guys, I just might have forgotten to check the display settings until 9 hours into the game. We'll fix it later on, but I am truly sorry. Now, on to the video. Welcome you lovely humans, it is Floaties, and Persona 5 is my comfort game. I have finished both the original and the Royal quite a few times, even made most of my friends play through it, and I just love how easy it is to get into the combat and various daily systems in this game. I believe those systems especially shine in a new playthrough, so we'll be doing that today. Initially, I wanted to talk about the Royal route specifically, but then decided against skipping to the end of the game. You don't need me to tell you how long the game is, and since I've played through it many times, this time I decided to challenge myself just a little bit. Basically, I'll try to finish the original scenario as fast as possible. I'm not really a speedrunner by any means, never tried to finish the game that way, so this is not especially a guide, but more like an excuse of a playthrough that I can talk over. Without further ado, here is what I'll be doing, and spoilers for the whole game. Of course, 1. We'll finish the game up until the original final boss. While doing that, I'll try to showcase dungeons, bosses, and some of the plot points, so we are not really following a timer. 2. We'll only finish the social links required for the Royal route, and rank up all of the main party members. 3. We won't be doing most of the side content unless it will give us some sort of easy boost. With all of that in mind, let's start the game. Persona 5 puts us on the run in the very first moment. This section acts a bit like a tutorial, but the game is already quite heavy in those. I'd say it more so lays the groundwork for the story, as Persona 5 really wants to create a much more cohesive experience throughout its story and gameplay systems, especially compared to the previous games, and succeed for the most part. The first big change in the Royal version introduces one of the new characters, Kasumi Yoshizawa. She helps us deal with the shadows, and this fight always ends the same way, with her special cut-in. Failing to escape, police forces catch up to us to remind us of a certain traitor. Once in the interrogation room, we choose our difficulty and name. I began in hard mode, but decided to change it to normal later on, as I just had to make this video in a relatively feasible time. Returning to a few months prior, the game begins. For the first few days, we are slowly introduced to the usual suspects. Café Leblanc becomes our new home. We take a quick trip to school, and that night we see the Velvet Room of the 5th game. I really enjoy the idea of being a prisoner here. Velvet Room always served to improve humanity in every game, and yes, here it does the same thing, but calling it rehabilitation just makes everything more urgent. First school day, we need to switch to the Ginza line, and you've probably seen that part. I played through here countless times, but I got lost somehow. Again, we failed the speedrun check, dudes. I'm sorry, let's pack it up. Moving on to the school gates, we meet with our first party member Ryuji, and together end up in a castle. The first dungeon represents the inner world of abusive and patronizing PE coach Kamoshida, aptly called the Castle of Lust. Shadows easily capture us there, and the protagonist awakens into his persona, Arcane. During our escapade, we are introduced to more mechanics and meet with Morgana, mascot character of Persona 5, and it is surprisingly the best iteration of it yet. He'll be with us for the whole game as the partner character, and I can understand why that might rub some people the wrong way. We really were completely on our own in the previous games, but Morgana grows with our actions in the story, and that makes him more sympathetic to me. He uses Zoro as a persona and only excels at healing and not much else. Following the return to the real world, we introduce ourselves in school and decide to explore that castle tomorrow with Ryuji. It will still be some time before we get the chance to free roam in the castle, so we'll move straight to the boss fight. We lose the fight since it's scripted, and Ryuji awakens to Captain Kid. Eligor can get some lucky hits on you, like that one. Still, we can easily get one more from Bicorn's electric weaknesses and finish the fight easily with guns. We begin our social links with Ryuji and later on Igor. Royal expands upon some confidence skills greatly and increases the triggering chances of those. Even without the new skills, just more chances for our teammates to down enemies or recover us make the social links worth it. The next day, the game forces us to take a different route in the dungeon and gives us access to the negotiations to acquire new personas. This is one of the best changes from Persona 3 and 4. I really hate that weird card system in those games. Negotiations are much more fun and let you actually get the persona you want easily. Shadows can have one of the 4 different personalities and you get used to the answer state like quite early. Since we'll be skipping most battles, it would be best if we could get them on the first try. Luckily, Royal made the negotiations much easier with your teammates constantly advising you. Next boss battle, Anne awakens to Carmen, and we got our full team, finally! Belphegor is actually quite a high level shadow from the 5th dungeon, so it is kinda weird to see it here. He'll just dish out a few attacks and Anne can down him easily each turn with fire. Anne will be a mainstay of the party thanks to her humongous magic stats, sleep skills, heals, and debuffs. Before the game lets us access to the whole dungeon, we'll open the clinic for recovery items and the untouchable to get equipment. Respectively, these locations also open up new social links to improve their item selection or prices. Having access to some revivals is vital, especially for the first few dungeons. Just try to get what is available. There are quite a few ways to get good items in the game. Lastly, we'll get a book from the library to not miss out on days when we score a seat to read. We'll finish every dungeon in a single day, but again it is much easier in Royal. Especially reworks on the gun system are amazing. Getting a refill to ammunition for every battle increases our damage output drastically and saves our precious SP. In general, I'd say Royal is an easier game compared to the vanilla version, but all of these changes just make the game much more fun to play. There are also some new shadows in every dungeon, like Kate's Seat. If you played the original, these new shadows keep things fresh and are usually strong enough to warrant getting them. Another addition to the dungeons is the glowing red shadows. The game refers to those as savage shadows and they are usually a few levels higher than the average enemies. These are quite valuable experience sources, but the best way to deal with them is to inflict status ailments and follow up with a technical attack, otherwise they cut through our health bars easily. For our playthrough, this translates to burning up our SP, so we may skip them from time to time. Technical damage also received a major overhaul, letting us entirely bypass resistances with technical damage, along with a high chance to inflict criticals. Arriving at the temple, here we find Archangel, and it is quite a straightforward boss fight. When it charges, we guard for his next attack and heal a bit when we are in danger. After defeating it, we'll find our first wheel seat. These are quite important for the first dungeons, as getting one replenishes our SP a bit. And if you find all 3 of them, you'll get access to an accessory that lets you use entirely new skills. But more on that later. Royal was supposed to give additional flashbacks for the palace bosses with these wheel seats, and I guess they didn't really want to paint those abusive targets in a sympathetic light. I think that was the better choice in the end. We arrive at the tower entrance, but they've changed all the shadows here into savage ones. Those guys could give quite an XP boost, but it is not really necessary. I chose to skip with the new grapple hook mechanic, getting access to the tower. The interior of the tower is easily the worst part of this dungeon. The corruption effect looks cool at first, but they never use it again, and the layout it creates just makes it a chore to move. For the third wheel seat, we take an elevator to another boss. Slime was originally a mandatory fight in the vanilla version, but otherwise it is not much different. It resists physical attacks, but scoring a technical attack with End Sleep is quite easy. The last wheel seat gives us Diorama, the second tier healing spell, which is a must for the following part of the dungeon. Before securing the route to the treasure, the game decides on padding a bit as it sends us back to the previous floors to find these golden shadows for a key. It is not something the game does often, but deciding to use it in the first dungeon just gives me a bad taste. These golden shadows are higher level Eligors which we've already faced earlier. After returning the keys, Angel and Archangel return as regular mobs. Archangel uses Vajra Blast and that decimates us in a single hit. So we skip straight to the final boss fight, and boys, that's one dungeon done. As we prepare for the upcoming fight, we can also begin improving our social stats. There is no reason to grind them all, and these are the final stats we'll be aiming for in this playthrough. Again, for the royal characters and teammates' social links. Kamoshida's boss fight acts a little bit like a tutorial, but we can still easily lose to it. The first part of the fight is dealing enough damage to force Kamoshida to use his healing ability, which we'll get rid of after destroying his trophy. He exclusively uses physical attacks. You can get some personas to counter that, but he doesn't really hit that hard. He'll usually use multi-hitting, but low-powered physical attacks, so just focus on getting to the next phase. In the next phase, he'll use his signature attack, which hurts a lot. So, once prompted with the question, we'll get rid of his summons to stop him from using it. You can easily get rid of Shizuo in a single turn, and he won't use that attack again. In the last phase, he improves his physical attacks kit with a strong single target attack and a new group attack. Respect the incoming damage and make use of the special orders mechanic. We send one of the party members to do something stealthily. These are moves more akin to scripted scenes and give you quite a generous boost against the bosses. Basically, you'll need to deal enough damage in the course of 3 turns, and the first time we fail miserably since my team couldn't really ignore the upcoming damage. You can always retry to send someone else, and I focused on physical attacks with Ryuji and Joker. It worked much better. Once his crown falls down, Kamoshida loses all of his defense and melts down quite easily. All in all, it works quite fine as an introductory boss. After witnessing the change of heart, we decide to keep helping people with quite an original team name. I'll mention training in our room specifically, as it is the easiest way to pass the time, and in time, it will improve our health a lot. So, if we can't do anything else, we can always raise some numbers. Here we are introduced to Mementos, or Everyone's Palace, as Morgana calls it. Mementos is an optional dungeon with randomly generated floors, similar to Tartarus from Persona 3, and usually has much weaker enemies compared to the actual palaces. As such, we'll skip it completely for now. In the end, it will be required for the final dungeon, and we'll talk about it more there. After an introductory fight for the plot purposes, we leave for the day. We made sure to level up our kindness and unlock Ant's social link foremost. Thankfully, they made Bait and Pass a universal mechanic rather than a social link ability this time around, but Ant's social link rewards are still totally worth it. Meanwhile, Takuto Maruki begins his job as a counselor at the school, and it is without a doubt the best social link in the game, giving us chances to recover SP, recover from status ailments, or double our attack power. This man will carry us the whole game. He is also required for the Royal route, so get on with it. With Royal they added some fine customization options for our guns, but since we are skipping the social link they will be hard to come by. After getting introduced to Yusuke, we move on to the second dungeon, the Museum of Vanity. After confirming the artist Ichiryusai Madarame as a plagiarizer who abuses his pupils, we begin our exploration of the dungeon. This one is easily one of the best dungeons in the game. Its flashy golden design and constant allegations to paintings or sculptures just make it look good. I'll try my best to show some of those. I tried to take on the Savage Shadow there, which destroyed us instantly. But we'll return to that guy, no worries. This dungeon divides the party quite a few times, but whenever it does it, enemies around scale their damage accordingly, so don't be afraid to run into them. The disaster shadows shown there can appear randomly and explode to deal damage to our foes once destroyed. They can take a few turns back to back, so focus on getting rid of them before they can act. They also drop some nice items. Joker and Skull have to do a boss fight here, but it dies in a few hits, again because of the scaling. On the other hand, Nue should help a lot once you fuse him. This boss fight opens up the second part of the dungeon and Yusuke awakens into Goemon. Yusuke deals good physical damage with access to ice skills, so he replaces Morgana instantly. The next mini-boss here is Ippon Datara, along with 4 Koppa Tengus. Tengus are weak to ice and usually focus on buffing the main boss. It can hit quite hard, as such get used to throwing a Rakukaja for defense, especially if you can't get rid of Tengus early on. We find another Savage Shadow and go ballistic with the nuclear skills we got. Sweet, sweet revenge. The rest of the dungeon relaxes on combat for a bit and moves with a few labyrinthine puzzles. Unlike most dungeons in the game, these puzzles move quite fast without throwing any other stuff in between. We almost secured our treasure route now. The game puts another mini-boss before the control room. Akurama Tengu works as a boss here with ice attacks, but at this point Yusuke just blocks him completely. On the other hand, the third wheel seat is protected by Arahabaki. Strangely, this version of Arahabaki has different abilities and resistances than the one you can get in the game. He repels physical attacks, inflicts charm and dizzy, and hits like a truck. The first try goes as well as you think, but we managed to confirm his wind weakness for some reason. He also uses psychological skills there, but his actual form is weak to them, so can't inherit any psychological attack. This is a boss fight against what you know of the SMT games. We send our calling card and do the most fashionable heist in the game, which ends up failing as per the case. Madarame's boss fight received quite an overhaul in Royal. The first phase begins the same with 4 different portraits. His eyes drain fire, ice, lightning and wind, while his nose drains nuclear, psychological, curse and bless. Additionally, his eyes and nose use elemental attacks and debuffs on the party. The mouth only drains the physical attacks and uses his own physical attack, so you can leave it as it is for now. Normally, Madarame only got access to restoring the defeated parts in the second phase, but here you need to destroy all of the paintings in the same turn. Madarame still uses his black paint to make someone weak to all affinities, but you can just guard that as usual. Additionally, you can receive a chance to use his paint against him with a special order, but you can also just wear it down with multi-physical attacks. In the second phase, Madarame only creates elemental copies of himself, and with access to bait and pass, you can get rid of them each turn. His main body will keep on creating new copies, and each time the chance to create a failed copy will increase. Just keep hitting their weaknesses and use high hitting physical attacks until you get rid of the main body. Not as interesting as the painting part, but I still like his design. We witness another change of art and take part in a cleaning activity with the school. I really wish we had more to do at school in Persona 5. With every confidant plagued by the evil adults, the school life portion just feels non-existent. At least they tried in Royal. Here we begin our social link with Kasumi. She is also required for the royal route and only has 5 ranks, for now. Before moving to the 3rd dungeon, we get access to a new neighborhood, Kichijoji. It harbors 2 important social links and offers many new activities, and almost all of them are quite worthwhile. Firstly, we play darts with Ryuji. I did skip every other minigame, but darts not only increase our proficiency and give additional social points, but also improve our Baton Pass rank, granting us health and SP for each Baton Pass in the battle. That single-handedly solves our SP shortage. Royal brings back the hangouts with Velvet Room attendants from Persona 3, and I am so happy with it. Not quite funny as Elizabeth, but the skits are still a good time. Twins also award you with skill cards, but we'll be skipping those as well. We meet with the high school detective Goro Akechi during our visit to a TV station and initiate his social link. Royal gave him a completely new social link, and this time it is entirely optional. But Akechi is required for the royal route and gives us something to do in the evenings. We also begin Yusuke's confidant. With those out of the way, Student Council President Makoto Nijima catches us red-handed and asks our help to deal with a mafia that targets students. Failing to access his flying dungeon, Makoto makes herself a target for us, and we gain access to the Bank of Gluttony as its customers. The game gives us access to Makoto immediately, and she gets Yohana. Makoto is literally absurd. She has defensive moves, recovery moves, and good physical and magical damage. You can bet she is here to stay for our entire playthrough. A good all-rounder that eases Joker's support role. The bosses we see there will be repeated quite often in this dungeon, and I'm not really a fan of that. Anyway, Suiki is weak to nuclear, and Oni resists physical attacks without any weaknesses. These guys just drag on your fights, but with the introduction of persona traits, inflicting burn, freeze, or shock becomes much easier, especially after a Baton Pass. Ryuji will work wonders for quite a while, and that will be my main strategy since he doesn't really need his SP as well. Getting access to the dungeon also introduces the showcase attacks. These are partner cinematic devastating attacks that are really broken. They ignore resistances, especially triggers when you are down or at low health, and can even be used without having the other partner in the team. Easiest win more mechanic ever and looks cool. This dungeon begins with a large foyer, and you don't put traps in the foyer. We immediately move to the 2nd floor as the shadows here are not really worth it. Those new dog shadows are supposed to be better at spotting us, but who knows. We need to deal with 4 Ouroboros here to gain access to the basement. They deal good damage to the whole party with fire skills, but they go down quite easily. Taking the elevator introduces the main gimmick of the dungeon, with cameras you need to keep track of. Although they raise the security level of the palace, you don't get kicked out of the dungeon in Royal, so they are not really a hassle. We also beat the Savage Shadow here on the first try. Makoto can cast Forget with Makajama to safely cheese these sponge enemies. Just don't follow up with an attack before the opponent's turn. Reaching the room with the giant safe, we run around a bit to get rid of the security there. Once you smash the cameras and fences, the game just teleports us to 2 different bosses. The first one is Fuki with a few wind skills, and he is weak to lightning. He can go down in a single turn. The other one is Suki, which we already fought at the beginning. You can play conservatively and leave Ryuji and Ann out respectively for these fights, but they are not really a big deal. Solving the safe opens up the second part of the dungeon. It does last a bit longer, but Royal added that middle part with a wheel seat and treasures, so that can skip most of the repeating rooms there. Although we easily breeze through that dungeon, we are getting low on resources, and our level might be a little bit behind for the following section. Choosing the safe way, we skip the savage enemies there and fuse the paper god Shiki-Oji for the next boss fight. That guy is a literal beast. Completely ignores physical damage, hits hard without an SP, and can even learn psychological moves. Boss fight again is a rehash with Suki and Fuki. The Golden Kinky on the other hand hits really hard, but only uses physical moves. We waste through those guys with our teammates as quickly as possible, as recurring Vajra blasts from Kinky are just not feasible. But once we single him out, even though he takes out our teammates, even though he resists physical damage, we can just rush him down. That could have gone better, but we are still kicking. The last section is a spiraling safe lock with a few code puzzles and new enemies. I opted to get some of the new personas before using those golden doors. If you pay 10,000 yen to them, they just take you to the end of the puzzles. We take wins wherever we can, guys. Even the last Wheel Seed boss doesn't cause much of a problem with his reliance on physical attacks. Shiki Oji is just that good. We send the next calling card and go for the third main boss. Kaneshiro also received a completely new phase with changes to some of his attacks. He begins the fight inside his Mecha Piggy and he switches between fire and physical attacks. Leaving Yusuke out would be a good call as he can also inflict a fifth status ailments like fear. Once he uses March of the Piggy, his signature attack, we would normally try to inflict enough damage to cancel that attack, but his royal version doesn't hit half as hard. Just don't forget to guard. He'll try it again, back to back, and the game will prompt you to throw an item. Choose the most expensive one just to be sure. He won't be able to act for a few turns, which should be enough to finish that phase. In his new phase, he summons two bodyguards. The big dude shields him from attacks and the little fly deals constant damage. Meanwhile, Kaneshiro can use sleep or fear to trigger technical damage. You can choose to get rid of these mobs first, but they are weak to almost all status ailments. Just incapacitate them and focus on Kaneshiro. If you've dealt enough damage, he'll finish the fight with a high hitting physical move, but that can never kill you, so have no worries. In Royal Mecha Piggy becomes a much simplified phase, but the mobs change the pace of boss fights a little bit. I call this boss, it is fine for what it is. That's another change of heart done. Before the fourth dungeon, we keep working on our stats and confidence. Billiards is also an amazing way to gather the whole team and doesn't take as much time as playing darts. The obligatory fireworks scene is still cute, and the rain just becomes the cherry on top for the following downhill arc. Taking down the mafia makes us visible to the public finally, and this time an anonymous hacker organization targets us. A mysterious source reaches out to us and asks us willingly to steal her heart. Thus, we end up at the Tomb of Wrath, where Futaba Sakura resides. By all means, this is quite an unusual dungeon with heavy allusions to Persona 4. Futaba sees herself as the sole reason for her mother's death and becomes a complete shut-in. Rather than an antagonistic shadow, Futaba's shadow tries to come to terms with that death and almost acts like a secondary personality. That cat and mouse play between her helpful side and dreadful side creates an ongoing storyline for the dungeon. If it is not apparent yet, this is one of my favorite dungeons and it is quite lengthy. So let us explore the Pharaoh's tomb. To gain access, we actually need to corner a boss in the near side city. I'd have liked to see more of these large landscapes in other dungeons, but it is a small section anyway. The boss here is Garuda. He uses 3rd tier wind skills and boosts his agility. He doesn't have any weaknesses, but is still easy to counter if you can manage the oncoming damage. Once inside the tomb, we are met with a circling area where you need to reach the top. There are a few shadows and treasures here, but nothing is really worth it and the way up is pretty straightforward. Savage Shadow Anubis cycles between Bless and Curse attacks and prefers instant kill spells. While he changes his affinities, you get a free turn, which makes Anubis not really intimidating. But his health is incredibly high compared to our damage output. It takes a while, but it goes down. I really like this dungeon's design, but it easily has the worst bosses in the game. Moth uses almighty damage and turns a party member into a mouse for a turn. That combination can take someone out easily, but he is weak to wind and also pretty easy to keep in check with status ailments. The following parts contain small puzzles to turn these beams toward the locked doors. We need to find a gem and a button for the first time, and it keeps on adding new twists to that formula, like not taking the gem until you open the way to the button. Later on, they will tackle a few jigsaw puzzles at the end to provide some backstory. Puzzle in the following room wants you to light these sarcophaguses in an order. There is also a second puzzle here to get the wheel seat, but it spawns some enemies once you activate it. So we'll just leave and return here before reaching the end to skip those guys. The next boss is really another mod with the exact same moveset. This time it comes with a Lamia and a Naga, but we've already seen those many times in the dungeon. Wheel seat boss is an Alilat and he'll use concentrate and ice skills in that order. He also repels physical attacks, so just down it with fire. Sending the calling card is also quite different here, as Shadow Futaba contacts the real Futaba directly and invites her to help the thieves. Before the actual boss, the game decides to add a final section to wear you out, so just ignore everything here to conserve SP. The boss here is actually Futaba's deceased mother, Wakaba Ishiki. Futaba still believes her mother blamed her for everything and creates that monstrous form. After coming to terms with her past, Futaba awakens to Necronomicon and becomes our distant helper. I know everything sounds great up until now, but that is easily the worst main boss in the game. This fight is almost entirely scripted without any meaningful changes, and Wakaba only uses a handful of attacks, physical and wind skills with a chance to inflict dizzy or despair can be troublesome, but most of the fight she'll just be flying in the sky anyway, so either buff up or use elemental skills to hit her. Once she decides to calm down, Wakaba tries to agitate Futaba, and if you answer correctly, she literally just dies. Look at the damage. Finally, a special order is a ballista attack that downs her in 3 turns. Again, that not only deals damage, but also incapacitates her for a few turns. While she's down, she takes tremendous physical damage, so don't waste your time with Zionga like me. Just be mindful of the coming damage and the fight plays itself. The party realizes that Futaba's mother's suicide was actually a murder. Following Wakaba's mental shutdown, her research into the cognitive world gets stolen. The 5th dungeon has the longest wait time in between, so we'll use that time to complete a few things. Akechi's social link unlocks the jazz cafe in Kichijoji, and it is an incredible way to improve our teammates' persona and helps with social links. For this playthrough, I decided to choose Anne as my love interest, but as always, it almost changes nothing. Finishing her social link turns Carmen into Hecate, and I'm really not a big fan of 2nd tier personas. Turning into mythological trickster gods, take away the rebel with a cause design of the original personas completely. Although I must admit Hecate looks good on her own and gives Anne dodge eyes, which is a must. Following that, we finish Ryuji's and Kasumi's social links. Kasumi also gives us the ability to ambush from afar, which makes dungeon grinding much easier. If you remember that star from a few minutes ago, we maxed out our social stats for this playthrough and we'll use that extra time to improve our HP and SP. Starting Futaba's social link, we immediately take her to the jazz club on Sunday night. Usually that gives the stated skill to our teammates' personas, but Futaba is special as our navigator and gains the chance to use debuff skills automatically. Finally, the school trip for Persona 5 takes us to Hawaii. On one hand, there really isn't much to do here, and even though they went out of their way to bring Makoto and Yusuke along on that trip, the game really lacks any events for that period. On the other hand, it serves as a story point to showcase Thief's fame overseas. Compared to previous Persona games, this one is still the worst school trip by far. Persona 5 usually has all these events sprinkled around, but waste this chance to have something memorable here. Spending some time with N, we finished that segment. Back in Japan, a Phantom Thieves fansite goes us into stealing the heart of Kunikazu Okumura, the ambitious CEO of a burger chain with shady political goals. The team's reluctance to accept that request makes Morgana question his goals, and he leaves in hopes to prove himself. The game kinda builds up to that section over the months, but Ryuji's dialogues here leave much to be desired. Morgana somehow manages to recruit Haru Okumura, our target's daughter, to help with his change of heart. After a few attempts to reconcile with Morgana, Haru's arranged fiancé Dushimus reunites the team, and we enter the Spaceport of Greed. This one is quite a weird dungeon and it drags out for a bit. Along with the usual shadows, the game introduces these robotic enemies. They come in a few different types, but they are reused so often that I can't really say they bring something new. This dungeon also has many enemies which can inflict hunger, an ailment that decreases our attack power. I'm still not sure if I were lucky or if they've toned down the hunger spam a bit in the dungeon, but I encountered much less often than in the vanilla game. The first boss fight with Haru's fiancé causes her to awaken into my lady, and I just love her moveset. She deals tremendous damage with gun skills, and although these robots all have different resistances, none of them resist the gun attacks. Thanks to Royal's changes to the Baton Pass, as Haru's social link won't be available for a while, this dungeon becomes much more fun. All little robots can use Ricandra to heal the bigger robots by sacrificing themselves, and has an accessory to use wind skills, and the main boss is weak to psychological. This formation makes it really easy to deal with all robots. The next section makes us search for an access key. We eavesdrop and confront various robots to locate the section chief. We've seen some of these robots already, so the strategy doesn't change much. Where Anne and Haru fail, their weaknesses to electric or nuclear can be covered by Joker and Makoto easily. Other than that, they usually possess similar attacks. Here we need to break some robotic arms to cross, so we just zigzag here to reach the ending. It is easy to skip most of the shadows here, and we'll need the SP for the second part of the dungeon. Ending of the dungeon is simply terrible. Here we use death machines to create bridges with a timer, and each time they increase the number of those. Terrible shadow placements here also make it harder to reach bridges in time, which lengthens an already long dungeon. The game throws a boss fight with waves of robots here, but they all go down in a single turn. Everyone's favorite airlock puzzles just waste even more of our time, but at least the shadows are much more forgiving this time. They even got rid of Skatach as a shadow here. She hit hard and acted as a roadblock in vanilla, but I guess she wasn't really in line with the star and sun designs of Mitras and Kaiwan. Sending the calling card triggers the fifth boss fight, and it is anything but a fun favorite. Before reaching the boss, we have to pass a small section in a 10-minute timer. I had to enter a fight there, and forgot to heal before the boss for some reason. Timer also never stops between all the animations, and it is not a tight timer, but still weird to have that here. The actual boss fight thankfully received some updates in Royal, otherwise it basically recycles all the robot mobs in order. You'll have a 30-minute timer, but don't even worry about it. Remember that Royal removed their gun resistances, so keep downing each of the robots and finish with Haru's triple hitting move. Although you can't hit Okumura, he still counts as an enemy, which prevents all-out attacks. My damage output is a little low here, and Okumura sometimes buffs their defenses or inflicts hunger. An easy counter is to use Matarukaja religiously and heal hunger immediately. The attack boost you receive lets you deal with small fry easily. If you fail to defeat the wave in 2 turns, Okumura just resets that phase. Robots usually focus on a single enemy, so just keep your damage constant. Later on, he'll order self-destruct on a single enemy and they hit almighty damage. It's not game ending, but keep those in mind. After we defeat all the robot waves, Okumura summons the executive director. He is more durable but doesn't have any resistance. That lets you easily dish out damage. He usually targets Haru with a single colossal physical attack, but don't put your trust in that. Keep your guard up. Once low enough, he charges with Big Bang Order, then follows with Big Bang Challenge. If you already had hunger inflicted upon you, this move actually heals you. Cool design. Otherwise, it is a heavy hitting move that you need to guard. Lastly, Okumura sends Roboharu to self-destruct. I was almost sure that she had a weakness, but that's not really the case, and I almost had to do the fight again. Thankfully, all those training with Joker pay off, and Okumura doesn't have any moves, so he goes down in a single hit. It is a long fight, but pretty straightforward. Just don't forget to go ballistic on Roboharu. Anyway, another dungeon is done. As we wait for the change of heart, we discover a new palace, and Kasumi awakens to Cendrillon with an amazing transformation sequence. We are robbed, and I want the same treatment for Joker immediately. Fight here only serves as a story scene, and Kasumi learns our real identity. We'll get more answers in the royal route. Here we also finish Maruki's social link. The 10th rank comes in a story scene. The change of heart happens, but Okumura's confession ends with another psychotic breakdown. They fixed Haru's reaction to her father's death a little bit here, but it's still very underplayed considering the circumstances. Obviously, all the blame is put on the Phantom Thieves, and we are forced to hunt down the real culprit. Akechi gets close to our thieves, implying he realized their actual identities and reveals himself as another Persona user. Persona 5 goes out of its way to show the villain's plans in constant cutscenes, but none of the party members really interact with any of these guys, so we just end up waiting for the events to happen. Akechi reveals the government's plan to arrest us on false claims and wants our help with stopping Prosecutor Sae's false justice, which happens to be Makato's sister. We've come full circle back to the beginning now as we enter the Casino of Jealousy. Akechi shows Robin Hood with access to good physical damage along with Bless and Curse skills. Instant kills actually come very handy in this dungeon, but as always, I choose to save our SP as we begin getting hard-hitting moves for everyone. This dungeon keeps switching between the soulless backrooms and the colorful casino atmosphere. One of that is better than the other. The first floor takes us through a quick section to get an access key. There are a few enemies that can counter physical damage here, so just be careful. Savage Shadow Ganesha uses Rebellion to increase everyone's critical rate, and that is always more beneficial to you. On the second floor, we get to gamble in a dice game to reach the higher floors. As the team quickly realizes all the games to be rigged, we follow another backroom segment with a very similar layout to cheat the game ourselves. That results in a boss fight with Nebiros. She mainly uses hard-hitting curse skills, so be sure to cover your weakness, because she can also use Brain Jack, a skill with a chance to charm the entire party. Haru has fast heal to get rid of ailments earlier and can also use Amrita Drop to cure her teammates. Maruki's social link can also save Joker after getting afflicted. Just respect Nebiros' moveset as it can overwhelm the party. Winning here lets us move on to the slot machines after a quick confrontation with a Jatayu. There are many lock screens in that part, but for some reason you can't interact with them until you reach the big slot machine at the end. The game also refrains from telling you that. Some of those locks only contain treasures. Still, it is very counterintuitive to our usual exploration in dungeons. The shadows can also be a bit tricky if they catch you while you are trying to finish the puzzle. Norn is a damage check boss battle. She has no weaknesses and can increase her defense. The real problem comes with her Diarahan skill, which heals her fully and she can spam it. Try for a technical hit or charge your attacks for massive damage. We can't get access to the rest of the dungeon until the next day. On the last floor, we need to brave a dark room first. This is actually a nice puzzle, as there are a few ways to open the locked doors around. Use Joker's focus to see around, as you won't be getting a map here. You'll need to fight with a Naga Raja at the end. Make sure to heal if you choose to deal with the shadows there. The last obstacle is an arena boss rush with a Soul Joker. It is still fairly easy, as they basically follow a series of attacks and damage scaling works wonders again. I always use Rangta here, as she repels all physical damage. Akechi tricks Saya's shadow by revealing how he always betted on us in the games, and we achieve the required coins to lower the breach. I really like how we outsmart the shadow here, rather than survive the traps. Normally we would send the calling card here, but this is connected with an event, so we actually have to wait for our supposed arrest date. Receiving a little bit of downtime, we almost clear everything we need to do here. We finish Akechi's social link with a duel, evolve Yusuke and Makoto's personas, and start her as confidant. I said we wouldn't have to do the Mementos until the very end, but I forgot about Futaba's mandatory request to save her childhood friend. Still, we are high enough level, and Ryuji's shadow kill let us defeat the lower level shadows in a single hit. This takes some time, but none of the items or shadows here matters to us at this point. Futaba can also randomly scan an entire floor, which lets us skip it completely. They added a lot to Mementos in Royal, but since I skipped most of it, I'll talk about those later. I still can't believe they decided to use a looping 2-minute long song for the entirety of Mementos in the vanilla game. Thankfully, the new tracks build upon each other, similar to Tartarus themes from Persona 3. The names of Mementos parts actually differ in Japanese and international versions. While all the names are taken directly from Kabbalah's Qlipoth, the Tree of Evil, the Japanese version uses a direct translation of these names. Actually, the words used as Mementos names are just distorted Hebrew words, so one-to-one translation can't be spoken about here, but it is still very obvious to see the connections. For example, Kimranut stands for materialism, Ayatsbuts for instability, Chemda for greed, Kaitul for vice, Agzeriut for cruelty, Adyeshak for insensitivity, and Sherirut for rejection. We find our target and complete almost all of the Mementos in the meantime. On the 18th of November, we send the calling card and begin the boss battle with Sae Nijima's shadow. The first phase is identical to the first game, as Sae will spin the roulette and ask for you to bet HP, SP or money. You can't attack her while the roulette is spinning, and since that part is scripted, we just wait for the special order to pop up. Catching her cheating reveals her true form, and we move on to a new phase. The vanilla version actually kept using that betting system until the last phase, which was a nice risk and reward system. Here in Royal, we are met with another roulette to represent different elements. Changing her element makes her resist every other affinity except the reverse of whatever she landed on. She also gains access to high tier skills of that element. If a party member has a weakness, Saya will always target them. She can follow up with hard-hitting physical moves or get rid of your buffs. Make sure to keep your guard up. Once her health drops low enough, she'll stop using elemental moves and cast Desperation, increasing her attack power greatly while reducing her defense. She also adds Berserker Dance to her moves to deal severe almighty damage, along with her severe physical attacks. That turns that fight into an endurance contest. Just make sure to stay on top of her damage and she should go down in a few turns. Just as we saw at the beginning, Joker needs to escape alone, but surprise surprise, Akechi was the traitor all along. Spoilers, I guess. Everything is exactly the same as in the beginning, and we return to our interrogation with Sae. So much happens here, but we basically convince her of our innocence, trick Akechi into shooting our fake version inside Saya's mind and fake our death. It is actually a pretty cool cutscene or series of cutscenes, but we decide to lay low until we can reach the true culprit. Luckily, Akechi mentions the name of his boss in a phone call, Masayoshi Shido, the presidential candidate. And this is the absolute worst cutscene in the game. Not only do they tell each other what they and we as the player already know, but all the dialogue here just comes off funny. Pinpointing our final target opens up the final palace, Cruiser of Pride, an arc where only the elite of the society survives. Before anything else, this dungeon is really long and circles around itself many times, so we'll straight up shoot for the ending. This dungeon has a nice gimmick. 5 bosses represent those who support Shido's political claims, and to reach the treasure we need to find and defeat all of them. After gaining access to the restaurant, we send Ryuji and Makoto to dine among the elites. Each target has a small cutscene with Phantom Thieves trying to blend in. These make the bosses much more memorable, but the lengthy downtime between them works against the strengths of the dungeon. The first target is politician Obe as Yamata no Orochi. He serves more as a level check for the party, buffing himself before using high tier ice skills. Make sure to guard, buff accordingly, and exploit his psychological weakness. Defeating him actually shows the moving time in the real world, creating an assured confrontation with Shido and Akechi. Most puzzles follow the principle of solving it again, but this time it is longer in Persona 5. This is easily the worst suspect of them. The rooms with Shido statues turn the party into rats, as we seek these small vents to open the locked doors. Nothing here is worth it. Absolutely nothing, especially with the end of the dungeon forcing a boss rush on us. Save whatever you have with you and keep taking down the bosses. Wheel seats are also more of a hassle than what they are worth here, so I chose to ignore them as well. This leads to the swimming pool, and we trick the second target here with Anne. Former noble turns into a Forneus and aggressively uses stagnant air to increase the odds of charm and confuse. Once successful, he'll follow up with strong side skills, not as hard-hitting as the previous boss, but still a menace. We move on to the back deck in search of a certain TV president after another one of those red puzzles, of course. Cleaner, our last target actually, ambushes us and senses Baphomets upon us. This will happen a few more times in the dungeon till we can get rid of the cleaner. These guys attack with single target spells and weak to bless attacks. Deal with them however you wish. Once inside, Haru uses his father's name to receive another invitation. TV President turns into Hanuman with 2 Garudas by his side. Hanuman can charge his attacks but doesn't actually possess a dangerous one. On the other hand, he can inflict rage on his allies to deal massive damage to you. Garudas also possess a few buff skills which change their roles depending on the state of the fight. We traverse the side deck and use Futaba to confront the IT company president, Oberon. Oberon is weak to nuclear and resists psychological. During the fight, he'll keep summoning Titanias with the exact reverse of his resistance. This trio can hit hard with their high magic stats, and Oberon can use instant kill bless attacks. You probably have a few homunculi here for the worst case scenario, but you can still keep Joker's bless resistance covered just to be safe. Finally, we enter the engine room to find the Yakuza cleaner. You'll have to fight 3 bosses back to back once you confront him, so make sure you are prepared. Ongyoki here uses curse and physical skills, exactly the opposite of Oberon. He can also use Heat Riser to buff all his stats and has the highest HP of the 5 targets. Anne and Makoto spent all of their SP to get us there, and that grants them a rest. Yusuke and Ryuji can keep on hitting even without their SP, and I equipped some accessories to let them use buffs for the team. Ongyoki hits hard, but since he only cycles his attacks, and we don't want to touch Joker's SP yet, we just cover his attacks with our persona and take him out. Just before the final push, Akechi solves our plan and decides to ambush us. This is a long fight, but it is more intimidating than it is hard. For the first phase, he'll summon Cerberus and Cuchulainn and cast Desperation on them to stay behind. You should easily deal with them thanks to their reduced defenses. Second phase, Akechi opposes us with his Robin Hood. He uses the same attacks when he was in our party, and I forgot to cover our Bless weakness just before the phase change, which Akechi absolutely took advantage of. During that phase, he targets the protagonist in a cycle: Bless attack, Curse attack, and finish with a physical attack. Once you deal enough damage, he'll use Megidolaon on the party for heavy almighty damage. Make sure to heal up. Completing that phase reveals Akechi as the Black Masked Killer, and he switches to Loki, a brand new persona. In that phase, he resists Bless and Curse attacks, and mainly focuses on physical skills. Especially Negative Pile can inflict despair, which guarantees your death in 3 turns. He sometimes uses Tetrakarn or Makarakarn to reflect the oncoming attacks. You can also play around these easily, as with evolved personas, party members block their elements completely. Once his health drops enough, he'll begin throwing fire and curse skills, and charge for Levitain, a heavy almighty attack that he'd always use on Joker. He can also buff himself or get rid of your buffs, especially if he exploits a weakness. Finishing that phase completes the dungeon, and weirdly our social link with Akechi, as he sacrifices himself for us to change Shido's heart. Futaba creates a calling card for the whole of Japan to see. Joker reveals himself to be alive and bets everything on that fight. Shido's shadow uses the cognitions of his supporters to create the sacrificial beast, before actually battling us himself. Sacrificial beast actually consists of 3 phases with completely different resistances and movements. Firstly, the beast form repels all physical attacks and aggressively uses buffs and debuffs, along with magical reflex to protect itself. He'll also try to inflict rage, so be careful. After a while, he'll charge for an almighty attack a turn, and you must remember to guard it. That form has a hard-hitting physical attack in Beast King's Wrath, but he doesn't follow it up, you just keep healing. Next is the Wings form, which resists all elements. He'll cycle through single target elemental skills before finishing with an almighty attack. Keep wearing him down with physical attacks. The last phase is the Tomb, and it only uses single target almighty attacks. Once his health is almost depleted, he'll charge 2 turns for an attack. Defeat him before that just to be safe. The fight with Shido also comes in 2 different phases. For the first part, his Samael form only has access to physical moves, but can buff himself with Heat Riser. Tyrant's Purge can also cause instant kill, but he'll never use it on Joker. Use that fight to patch up and get ready for the actual beast. True Samael fight actually loops in a cycle, but after that many phases, surviving could become a challenge. He'll use the elemental attacks in the same order, but this time will target the whole team. Make sure to heal and guard accordingly, as the next phase is gonna hit even harder. Once the elemental phase is complete, he'll begin buffing himself and use Tyrant's Glare next turn to use all of his devastating attacks in a single turn, potentially decimating multiple party members. Remember to get rid of his buffs, otherwise healing is gonna take its toll. Lowering his health enough turns the battle into a duel between Shido and Joker. This time he is gonna use the last tier elemental attacks with immense damage output, but just as always, he'll cycle those in order. Since he also has no resistances, a few repels can help to finish this phase. I really like this boss fight along with the other bosses of the cruise ship. They create a nice difficulty ladder that feels completely earned. Every high point of Persona 5 must get a low counterpart, and Ryuji's dedication here helps everyone to escape the collapsing palace. Then they beat him up and leave him there for causing them worry or something. I can never understand that scene, but here it is. In the last couple of days, we finished the remaining social links of Futaba and Haru. Futaba learns Final Guard, which can protect the whole party once if multiple members would get incapacitated, especially during boss fights. That is gonna help us to push through in the final section. And by final section, I mean the Mementos. Even though Shido admitted his crimes, thanks to us changing his art, the people keep acting like none of it ever happened, deciding our goal to be getting rid of all the distorted desires in the palace of everyone. We arrive at Ivelet, the path of ignorance. Reaching the end of Mementos reveals a one-way gate to a new dungeon. Depths of Mementos, compared to the other dungeons, is the shortest one, and almost completely linear. Returning to the twins at the entrance heals you completely, which makes this an incredible grinding spot. But this is still a speedrunish something, so we press on. Each floor begins with a circular mini-boss field and connects to a small color puzzle at the end. All of these bosses usually have a single strong move, and they are gonna keep on using it. There are no wheel seats there, but you can still find Savage Shadows. Abaddons there offer real good XP, but don't try to rush them down. Gigantomachia hits everyone with a colossal physical attack. As we spiral down the depths, we come to realize this is actually a prison for the humans who gave up on their desires. And the palaces were of those who held on to their beliefs, twisted beyond what it originally was. Prison of Regression ends with another puzzle, and we find the treasure of everyone at the very end. The Holy Grail is another scripted battle where we have to lose, and the Grail successfully encompasses the real world, raising the thieves from the cognition of everyone. Joker wakes up in the Velvet Room, where Igor blames humanity for failing to grasp the truth of our actions. He orders the twins to execute us, but the twins refuse and remember their mission to nurture the human mind. That is a very weird cutscene, where we fuse the twins with the guillotine, and the presumably fake Igor just watches us, standing there menacingly. Igor turns out to be a twisted god born from the human desire to be controlled, cause of course he was, and he just leaves. We reunite with our friends in the Velvet Room. It's so nice to have everyone in the Velvet Room together again. Mighty Atlus made it a protagonist-only place with Persona 3. Real Igor and the newly formed Lavenza give us words of encouragement, and we leave for the final battle. Here, Shibuya turns into the Qlipoth world, and one last rush is all that is between us and the final boss. Similar to the previous dungeon, we just run past each enemy here and get forced into a boss battle with the Heralds, the 4 Archangels. Even though it is a cool setting, compared to the bosses in Shido's palace, these just act as a level check without any significant moveset, and we keep climbing the Tree of Evil. They can still hit hard, but you already know that. Michael actually has a few different passive skills to increase his damage output, but his health can easily melt away. If you watched up until there, thank you, really everyone. I wanted to do this video for 2 years now, and it was really fun to work on that. For the last boss, my team is Joker and Makoto and Haru, just like in the past few dungeons. And our rematch with the Grail begins. That is really the door boss of the game. You can think of Ameno Sagiri from Persona 4, but it is much tamer. You won't be able to heal in between the phases, and this really exists only to wear you down. Similar to the first encounter, Grail uses the will of people to heal itself fully, but you can give a special order to cut the veins. Just like always, you need to keep dealing damage to it for 3 turns. Actually, they changed that in Royal, so even if you don't give that order, the Grail will just stop healing after a while. Grail only uses almighty attacks, and switches between single target and multi-target variations. He only has a single turn, so just keep piling on it as necessary. He can charge using Gathering Light, and as always, that is your sign to guard. That ends up being a short fight before the main event. Grail transforms into Yaldabaoth, or Demiurge, the god of control. Yaldabaoth will gain access to new skills by creating new parts throughout the fight. In the end, he can get up to 5 successive turns. Getting rid of a part can give a breathing room, but he can always restore them with half health. The good news is, he doesn't really have any buff moves or colossal attacks. Instead, he focuses on different status ailments that get unlocked throughout the fight. Most of these make allusions to the previous bosses we defeated, as they represented the 7 deadly sins with their shadow forms. Anne and Haru dealt constant good damage, and the Joker along with Makoto provided enough buffs and support. Since this is a final boss, you can be lax with your items at that point, but don't waste everything, as there is still the royal route. For the most part, I went with multi-hitting moves to chip away at his parts and focused my big attacks on the main body to shorten the fight. The main body of Yaldabaoth usually attacks with an almighty skill and can get rid of our buffs and debuffs. Obviously, those are our life and limb to keep his additional attacks in check, so reapply as necessary. He'll summon the gun first with access to Lust, which causes a party member to skip their turn. All of these statuses last for a single turn and they can't be cleansed. It can also use a few gun skills and to no one's surprise repels gun and wind attacks. The bell follows shortly and uses Vanity, Madarame's painting move to make someone weak to all attack types. Guard as necessary, just like before. Bell doesn't really deal much damage but can increase the Yaldabaoth's defense. It also repels fire and psychological. The sword appears with Gluttony and doubles the cost of skills for a single turn. You can keep the pressure with physical skills if you don't want to waste SP. Sword repels all physical attacks and deals the most damage with its moves, so keep an eye on that. Lastly, the book comes with Wrath, which basically inflicts rage on someone for a single turn. The book also has access to all single target elemental attacks, but they are only the heavy types, so there is no need to worry. The book also repels ice and nuke damage. After a certain time, all of his parts will begin gaining new ailment attacks, but his damage output will stay consistent throughout the fight. The gun can use avarice to inflict hunger, that also damages a bit. Bell will use jealousy to inflict charm on a target, and book will gain pride, a certain dangerous counterattack that lasts for a turn. Use that time to reapply your buffs. Our strategy works wonders, and we easily vest away the main body. At that time, Yaldabaoth will use his charge move, Divine Apex, for 2 turns. Normally, you must guard against that, but I gave in to the greed as he almost had no health left. I was almost punished, but Futaba is certain to trigger once during boss fights and saves our bacon at the last moment. Yaldabaoth falls, and finally, the whole city cheers for the Phantom Thieves. You'd see a scene there with all your maxed out confidants, but since we skip them all, we get nothing. The prayers of people evolve Joker's persona into Satanael, the demon general of hell. Even though the game refers to him as Satan before the fall, since the whole Mementos is deeply imbued with Gnosticism and Kabbalah, Satanael interpretation probably comes from there. An angel that served an ignorant god. Yaldabaoth, a shadow, he believed his knowledge to be absolute. Satanael deems him a false god and gives humanity the knowledge to escape his control. Here people summon Satanael back to fire the sinful shell, a bullet made of our deadly sins, yet still praises them as desires to have hope and improve, denying the regression of ignorance, the regression of Yaldabaoth. Thank you so much for watching. The original Persona 5 ends with our victory here. Hopefully that provided some insight. In my next video, we'll only focus on the royal route. And I'll see you guys next time.